Okay, it's recording. Haha, we did it.
Alrighty.
All right. Welcome back to the Alamo Ranch Ward podcast. And I'm here in my office this time, sitting across the table from Elder Bryan Loertscher. And so first of all, tell us who you are, introduce yourself, and a little bit about, where you're from and how you came to be in our ward.
That's me. I am Elder Bryan Loertscher. I'm currently serving as a service missionary here in the San Antonio, Texas mission. I was born in Washington State, but my dad, he shortly after joined the Air Force, and so I've moved around pretty much my entire life.
How many places have you lived?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to count. I can't do it on one hand, that's for sure. I lived in Washington for a little bit, and then Texas for a couple of years, and then Idaho and Colorado and Louisiana and Arizona and Maryland twice, and then Rhode Island. So that's, I think, 7 places where I've lived. And this last move was interesting. My dad just retired, and now he's working a different job. But we were living in Rhode Island, and then I started my missionary service. Initially, I was called to serve in Curitiba, Brazil. It's a pretty small mission in the southern part of Brazil, and I served there for about 20 months. And then I ran into some health issues, and I had to come back to the United States to get those taken care of. And in the meantime, my family moved from Rhode Island to Texas. And now we're here in the Alamo Ranch Ward.
So it must have been odd, I guess, to leave from one ward and then come home to a different ward that you weren't familiar with or you didn't know anybody in.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, just felt like another transfer.
Yeah.
Getting transferred to a new area.
Another missionary transfer. So let's talk about your mission to Brazil or your call. So I served in Brazil as well. Mm-hmm. I went to Sao Paulo 20 some odd years ago, 20 plus years ago. So very different. But you mentioned it was a small mission. Do you mean small geographically or small by the number of missionaries that were there?
It's small geographically. I think the mission size, I should have done that. The mission takes up maybe a third of the state of Brazil, and the state of Brazil is the size of Missouri, okay. I think. So maybe that's a large mission by American standards.
But you could drive across it.
Yeah, for sure.
Easily.
The furthest from the mission headquarters to the very edge of the mission where we had missionaries was about, I think, 6 hours by car.
Okay. Were there more? Is there more than one mission in Curitiba, like in the capital, or?
There is. There's Curitiba, without any suffix, and then there's Curitiba South, the other mission. And there may or may not have been a little bit of tension and rivalry between those missions while they were...
North versus South. Southern Kingdom and the Northern Kingdom.
Thereabouts.
That's awesome. Okay, so you spent 20 months in a teaching mission. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we call those proselyting missions. I think nowadays we're starting to call them teaching missions. Mm-hmm. And then transferred to a service mission. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of service missions before you went on your mission, your teaching mission?
I was. I had some inclination of trying to apply to be a service missionary just because I was really afraid of going out and, talking to people that I didn't know. It's not a skill that I have to a very high degree, and that's pretty much all that missionaries do, is they go and they talk to people that they don't know. And so I didn't really want to do that, and I thought I would try to serve a service mission. I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew it was a mission, but less teaching.
Right.
And I thought, I'll try to do that. But after prayer and revelation, I felt impressed that I should apply to serve a teaching mission.
Yeah. And sometimes people are a little bit surprised when they ask me, can I just apply to be a service missionary? Mm-hmm. And they're a little surprised when I tell them it's just one missionary application. You fill out the same missionary application for either thing.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And then, there's no real place to indicate if you want to be a teaching missionary, service missionary. Some, medical restrictions or some things will automatically come back as a service mission opportunity. And sometimes it's, borderline and like the Brethren issue called as a service missionary, or they issue it as a teaching missionary. So, but yeah, it's one application. It's kind of
what do you know?
Crazy. So tell me more about what it is like to be a service missionary in San Antonio. Are there a lot of service opportunities and they're organized, or have you had to kind of figure out what to do, or how's that worked to like go from being a teaching missionary to suddenly dropped into a new area, new assignment, new responsibilities? So what kinds of things do they have you doing?
Well, the transition, fortunately, was pretty smooth. I was trying to keep busy as a teaching missionary, and I got shipped back to San Antonio. And pretty much right off the bat, the service missionary advisors, the leaders, they told me about some stuff that I can do. They had me start the process, or they offered me the opportunity. I started the process of becoming a temple ordinance worker.
Yep.
I think I started that 3 weeks after I got back. And they also told me about the Bishop's Storehouse and the San Antonio Food Bank. They have this big slideshow with all the places where you can serve and information on how to start serving there, what you need to do to get onboarded there, what times. And so I just looked at that and started finding stuff to do.
Okay. And so it's been a couple months now serving here, and you've got about a month left in
That's
your mission.
right.
That's awesome. Okay, let's go back to before your mission. And, this, again, the spirit of the podcast is like, let's get to know ward members better and like connect so that when people see you at church, they know more about you and like what you're all about. So let's go, before you were a missionary, growing up, like what were your hobbies? Like what did you enjoy doing?
Well, I've always enjoyed reading and books, especially audiobooks. Any kind of book that has a story in it, an adventure, maybe a sword or two. I'm a big fan.
Awesome. So fantasy.
That kind of thing. And I also enjoyed playing video games, all kinds of video games.
Any particular game that...
Well, I would play a lot of Super Smash Brothers and Mario Kart.
Nice.
Mostly Nintendo games I would play. But I would do that a lot with my family. I have a large family, 9 siblings. And so I would do that. I would also play with Legos.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Legos quite a bit.
Were you the kind like you would only put together like the set and like follow the instructions? Or were you more like creative, I build whatever I want kind of guy?
Well, over the years, my family has acquired a very large stash of Lego bricks.
Bins and
so
bins, yeah.
We have the Lego sets, and those are ones that we take care of, and we try to keep track of the models, the pieces. We put them in bags. We open the bags. We put them back together. Yeah. And then there is kind of this ocean of Lego bricks that is made up of individual pieces of other sets that have been lost to time. Mm-hmm. And so we just build whatever we want with those. Yeah. I like to build spaceships, aircraft.
Oh, cool.
Cool stuff like that.
I grew up, we had a decent amount of Lego, not a ton, but we always fought over the big hinge. Mm-hmm. We had like this tow truck or whatever, the big hinge came from the tow truck. It was like how the back of the hinge, the tow truck would hinge up and down. And so my oldest brother he was bigger than me and my middle brother. And so, he always got the big hinge basically. At the end of the fight on Sunday morning playing with Lego, like he ended up with the big hinge and I ended up with like the little miscolored, misshapen parts and pieces. I just had to build something with. I don't know if there's a similar pecking order at the Loertscher household when it comes to building Legos, or if you guys are very cooperative and peacemaking with each other.
There's, I guess, just so many Legos that if you take a piece that somebody else wants, you can probably look in another bin and find another copy of that piece. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff.
There's probably a big collection from so many siblings assembling Lego over
it started about 20 years ago with my older brother, and it's only gotten worse.
I can imagine. I know that you play the piano, or you're musical. Did that all start during high school, middle school, or?
That started. I first started taking lessons when I was 9 or 10, I think. Yeah. I think I was 10 years old when I first started piano lessons.
And then you picked up other instruments or tried other instruments?
Not as much. When I was in Brazil, I found not a lot of spare time, but every night I had a little bit of spare time and I wanted to relax a little and do something fun. So I started playing the guitar. Okay. And so piano, I know the best. I can do a little bit of guitar. I'd like to learn to play the bass as well, but that's not really happening just yet.
So you're going through your teenage years, high school years, and you're approaching the time to serve a mission. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, what did you always want to serve a mission? Was it sort of, something you look forward to your whole life, or was it something you had to kind of get comfortable with the idea of going, or how did that decision-making process work for you?
Okay. So when I was much younger, I thought I would serve a mission. I didn't think, oh, well, do I want to serve a mission? No. The Lord has called us to serve missions, and that's what I'm going to do. And then that decision really solidified in my mind, became more active when I was about 12. And my older brother, who's now 29, I think, lives in Utah. He returned from his mission, and he served in Peru. And he spoke very highly of the experience and said, yeah, it's amazing. I would highly encourage all my younger brothers to serve missions. And I looked up to him quite a lot. And so I thought, well, I guess that's right. I will serve a mission. And then I had to get a surgery on my hip and had some back problems. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'll be able to serve a mission. And then some other things happened during my high school years. And I found myself a little bit distanced from the idea of being a missionary. That wasn't something I really wanted.
Yeah.
I knew that I should because it's a commandment, but it wasn't something that I really wanted to do. And then I wasn't sure what I should do. I was going to school at BYU, Idaho. I was looking for employment opportunities. I was thinking, okay, I need to decide. And I went through the process, and I got my patriarchal blessing, and it was made very clear that I should, in fact, serve a mission.
Oh, okay.
And so I thought, well, I guess I'm going to serve a mission then.
It's back on the plan.
Darn. And so that was the point when I kind of buckled down and thought, okay, well, we're doing it. And put the papers through and was called to Brazil.
Awesome. What was that like to receive that mission call? It was like, did you open it alone or with your family or with a bunch of friends?
I was in college when I received my call.
Okay.
And so I think it was that evening we arranged a Google Meet, I think it was, some kind of online meeting. And it was my family, a couple of cousins, my grandparents from both sides maybe. And there were a lot of people on that call, and I saw Brazil, and I thought, what? I'm going to be walking around with a machete, cutting my way through the jungle?
Awesome. Okay, so you go to the MTC, and you've already been to BYU, Idaho, which is like its own little microcosm in the world, I guess. It's its own little universe. And you go to the MTC, and what's your experience like there? Now, did you train in Provo and in the Brazil MTC, or?
I was trained only in the Brazil MTC.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us about that experience. Like jumping on a plane, hopping, 14 hours to Sao Paulo, to some building out there that says, Centro de Treinamento Missionario on it.
Well, it was a really neat experience. After the plane flight, I'm not very accustomed to long travel. I was pretty miserable after the plane flight, and I just showed up in this place, and everybody's speaking Portuguese, although most of the people there speak English as well. And they just said, okay, you're here. Here's your tag to get into your room. Lunch is at this time. Go unpack your stuff, I guess. And my experience there was very positive. I don't know if I'll manage to work at the MTC, but I would love to, just because it's a fantastic experience. Just every single day I was learning about the gospel and talking about the gospel. And that was the only thing we did. Yeah. And I loved it. It was amazing. It was the difficulties I encountered there were mainly because of my companions. My other companions, they didn't adapt so well to the MTC life, the expectation of high discipline. And they were running around and playing basketball when they should have been in class and all kinds of goofy stuff like that. Huh. Overall, it was a very positive experience. I loved it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I remember my time there. And I tell this to missionaries that are preparing to go out now when I interview them. You're not going to wake up on your mission and just suddenly be a different person than you are today. The same desire you have to play basketball or to, mess around on your video game or whatever, like you're going to take that with you on your mission. And so you need to kind of establish before you go out, like whatever habits you think are going to be useful for you or helpful for you when you're there. I wanted to ask about learning the language because, a lot of youth in our ward are a little apprehensive about learning a language. And it might be a little bit difficult. And so did you find it difficult? Had you already studied languages before your mission, or was this the first time you learned a language?
I was an unwilling participant in a couple of Latin classes
Okay.
at a homeschool co-op.
Yeah.
That was the extent of my language learning experience. My dad, he speaks Spanish from his mission in Costa Rica. And so I kind of heard him speaking a little bit of Spanish, but that was it. I found it very difficult to learn the language.
So did you leave the MTC feeling like you knew what you were doing, or was it like faith going out of there like, I'll figure this out as I go?
Well, I left the MTC thinking I knew what I was doing. I left and I thought, okay, so I can understand.
Yeah.
If people talk to me, I'll understand what they say. And then I started talking to real people, and I didn't understand anything. It made no sense. It wasn't words. I couldn't recognize sounds. It was just a random string of ambient noise almost. I just couldn't understand it. I could speak a little bit. Mm-hmm. I knew enough to say a prayer and bear my testimony. And that's pretty much all I did for a couple of months.
Yeah. And so did you spend study time in the morning on the language? Or was it just exposure, like being in with people, talking to people in the street, talking to people in their homes, and that's how you sort of ramped up on it? Or both, maybe?
Well, they give you a little workbook of the language that you're supposed to study.
Yeah.
And all the tryhards in the MTC actually study it. They make flashcards, and they're like, yeah, I'm really understanding the language now. I didn't, obviously. And I didn't do it during morning study either. My companion, who was an American, my first companion, he said that he thought the best way to learn the language was to go out and talk to people.
Yeah.
And so my morning study, I would read the Book of Mormon in Portuguese, and I would read Preach My Gospel in Portuguese.
Okay.
And reading, it wasn't as bad. I could understand it better when I was reading, and I would have the Portuguese scriptures open and the English scriptures open, and when necessary, I would look between them and figure it out. And aside from that, it was just talking to people, talking to members, non-members, all kinds of people like that.
Yeah. It really is a miracle how much you can learn in the MTC, that you can actually leave the MTC knowing how to say a prayer and bear your testimony. And I think that's a pretty common, I remember feeling that way. Mm-hmm. Like I could do those things, but I also remember getting out to the street and doing what I thought was going to be a contact, right? Like making a contact with somebody. And I was like, look, Elder, I don't know what they said.
You say, hello, how are you? And they say, ah.
Yeah. And you're like, I didn't understand any of that. Do you want a Book of Mormon? Just whatever I can do to cut this off. But yeah, then, those first couple of months, right? Mm-hmm. They're just like, you just absorb it, I feel like. And some miracle happens where suddenly you understand and suddenly you can respond and then joke around. And then, Then
you learn the slang, and then you learn the accents.
Yep. And then, 6, 8, 12 months in, suddenly people are saying like, you kind of sound like you're from America, North America, you sound like a native, So it's like you get there. I'd love for you to share, like, how was your mission different than you expected it to be? Thinking about like what you perceived a mission to be as you were preparing, or as you were a youth, you thought, oh, okay, this is what people must do on their mission. And then you actually get there and you're like, oh, this is what people really do on a mission. How was that different or the same as what you thought?
Well, it would be difficult to put words around what I thought a mission would be like, but actual missionary service is totally different from what I thought it would be. Most of my exposure to missionary service was through things like The District and like videos and stories about missionaries that went and did stuff.
Okay.
And so I thought, I don't want to offend anybody by saying this, I thought it was much higher caliber than it really was. Okay. I thought it was all like in-depth planning, and you had like a general's tactical map on your table, and you would think, okay, we need to hit these houses. And to a certain extent, that does happen. But I thought there would be in-depth planning about every single lesson, and like, oh, but this investigator, when they were 5, their mom said this, and we need to talk about that in our lesson today with the one scripture from Alma 32 that says this. And when in the Brazil Curitiba mission, at least, it's much more haphazard, I guess. It's just a bunch of missionaries who are doing their best and mostly making it up as they go along. But somehow they feel the Spirit. We feel the Spirit, and it's powerful. And the Lord gets his work done somehow.
Yeah.
I don't really know how, but you go out and you try to talk to people, and somehow you end up teaching. And it's amazing.
I love that way you express that. We used to have a saying, you know the church is true because the missionaries would have destroyed it long ago if it wasn't. Because they can see this. They can see 19-year-old, 18-year-old, young kids out there figuring it out as they go along, right? Like doing their best.
For sure.
And they're independent, right? I mean, you have a mission president, you have, a district leader, his own leader, whatever. You have the structure around you, but every day you wake up and you figure out what to do. Mm-hmm. And I remember some days were slow, right? But the weeks always flew by. Yeah. You're like, oh, it's Sunday again. Oh, it's Sunday again. And then I had a chunky calendar on my mission, so I could kind of see how the time was passing, And I for sometimes in my mission, I would get it out, and I would be like, oh my gosh, I haven't crossed out 3 weeks. We've been busy, and like these weeks have flown by. But yeah, some days are slow, where you're like, oh, what are we going to do today? Well, this lesson fell through, or this commitment we had fell through, and now what do we do? Zooming out, this is a big question. How do you feel like serving a mission has changed you, has changed your faith, has changed the way you experience, religion in life? Like, has it changed the way you look at things, or, your experience being there, your experience now coming here and serving? How has it changed the way you think about your testimony of the church?
One of the things it did is it really made me grateful for the church's teachings, because I talked to a lot of people who are firm believers in other faiths. And I met a lot of really amazing people from other faiths. But I found a huge lack of understanding about basic things like the nature of God. Mm-hmm. There's an understanding we have about the nature of God that so many other people, they just don't have. It's just not something that crosses their mind. And it also really helped me to understand just how important the church is, how important it is in our lives. We met people who, for one reason or another, they stopped going to church, our church or a different church, and it had an effect on their lives. And then we started bringing them to church, or back to church in some cases, and things started looking up. They were happier. And that made me realize that it really does make a difference. And I don't know, maybe the largest change was my desire. I don't know the best way to say this. Before my mission, I had this view that there were some people that were super spiritual and other people that were not super spiritual. Like they just couldn't feel the Spirit, or they couldn't receive promptings, or they didn't understand the scriptures very well, or they just couldn't give good talks. And it was kind of like a on-off state. You were either good at being spiritual or you weren't good at being spiritual. And I always saw myself as somebody who wasn't very good at being spiritual. I didn't have that desire. I would, when I was in college, for example, I never thought like, I'm going to wake up and read my scriptures for half an hour today. I thought, that's something that only super spiritual people do. I can't do that. But serving my mission, I realized so many people I thought were super spiritual, they really weren't. That was a bit of a shock to me. Like these missionaries who go out and they preach the gospel every day. They're district leaders and zone leaders and assistants to the president and everything. People I would have thought is, oh wow, they're so spiritual. They're just people.
Yeah.
And some of them maybe don't take it as seriously as they ought to. And that made me realize I can't rely on other people to be spiritual. This is something that I need to do for myself, because I can't just be leeching off of the supposed spirituality of other people. I need to have my own source, my own testimony. I need to read my scriptures. I need to go to the temple. I need to be self-reliant.
I'm curious, you serve the people of Brazil, which are generally speaking a warm, very friendly people, and you come to San Antonio. Now you're serving the people of San Antonio. What have you learned from people, like serving people, being with people? What have you learned about these people? What are the common threads that you now find in humanity, having served, as a missionary across two different, very, very different cultures and people?
I've discovered that, for one, there are more religious people around than I thought. I lived in kind of rural Rhode Island. I was homeschooled for a lot of my life, and so I didn't have a huge exposure to just how much religion there is in the world. I assumed it was like me and my family and my ward, and then just some kind of vast ocean of atheist humanity or agnostics. And it was a bit of a shock, because you go to Brazil. Brazil is an extremely faith-filled country. I think throughout the 20 months I was there, talking to people every day, I think I found 2 people who said they didn't believe in God. And that was it. And so I thought, wow, everybody here believes in Jesus Christ. This is amazing. And then I come to San Antonio and I realize, wow, everybody here also believes in Jesus Christ. It's amazing. And it's been really inspiring to me to realize just how many of those people there are. Be they of our church, some other church, or no church at all, there are a lot of really good people who sincerely want to do what is right.
What's next for you now as you sort of wind down your mission and think about life ahead? What's on the radar?
Well, the current plan is I'm going to Utah State. I was offered a scholarship there, so I'm transferring to study mechanical engineering or computer programming at Utah State.
And that'll be in the fall?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll be here at least through the summer.
Yeah, I get to experience the San Antonio summer. I need to...
It's awesome.
I bet.
Take your sunscreen.
I'm excited. I need to find some kind of job and make some money, but that's pretty much all that's on the radar for now.
Awesome.
Just keep doing the things that make the mission important, i.e. study the scriptures, go to the temple and go to church, and move on.
Yeah.
Get ready for college.
That's the best part about a mission is, or any calling in the church, is that there's an end of it. And it's over at one point, and then you move on and you do something else with your life. And, I remember people asking me all the time as a missionary, like, will you do this? Is this your job forever? I'm like, oh no,
Thank goodness.
I've got a life after this. I promise. I got plans. We go home after 2 years. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Just to conclude, maybe what advice would you have for someone thinking about a mission, or that's, planning to serve a mission, or maybe doesn't know whether they want to serve a mission? What advice would you give to a young person who's in those teenage years and trying to figure out is a mission for me, or what do I need to think about when it comes to a mission?
It's not as difficult as it sounds. And exactly what the day-to-day of a mission looks like depends a lot on where you serve and who your mission leaders are and what expectations there are. But it's not as difficult as it sounds or appears. It's scary. You go to some random country or some random town and you have no idea what's going on, and you have to learn all these new skills to be a missionary. But it's not as difficult as it sounds, because in spite of how much new stuff you have to do, how much stress is put on you, the Lord, He really comes through and He helps. I think that might have been the thing that surprised me most about my missionary service. And it sounds kind of wrong to say that. I didn't know the Lord would help me as much as He did.
Wow.
I didn't know that somehow out of my back pocket I would pull the strength to walk 15 miles a day in 100-degree weather that sunburns you through a hat and sunscreen. Mm-hmm. I didn't know I could do that, and somehow I did. And that's just amazing. the Lord, he helps those who strive to serve him. And you'll never know just how much the Lord is willing to help you until you put your trust in him and throw caution to the winds and throw yourself into his service.
I don't think we can add anything to that. That's a beautiful testimony, I think, and experience hard won from 2 years of service. And I think every missionary should end feeling like a hero. And so I hope you end feeling like a hero because you have been a hero, I think, for those people that you have served over the course of the last couple of years. So thank you for being a great example and being a great missionary, and have a great last month of your mission.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll do my best.